So today we're going to be looking at 3 different kinds of irony, and hopefully for most of you this is going to be a review, but I do want to go through the PowerPoint real quick just so that we can all make sure that we have the notes. Okay? The question is, what is irony? And irony is about expectations. So with irony, typically the opposite of what is expected to happen actually happens. And at least for those of you that were upstairs with Miss Ewald and I earlier in the year, if you remember, we watched that video, and in the video the man was carrying the cake and he tripped and he dropped the cake all over the place, and we said that's not irony, because if somebody's carrying a giant cake, you expect them to trip and fall. What would be ironic, however, is if that person was like a professional cake carrier and they tripped and fell. Then you have irony, because you wouldn't expect a professional cake carrier to trip and drop a cake. Okay? So what is expected to happen is not what actually happens. That's how we define irony. Okay? There are actually 3 different types of irony, and we're going to give each of you a chance to kind of break those down and work through each of those today. One of those is verbal irony, one of those is dramatic irony, and then one of them is situational irony. And we'll look at each of those individually. First thing is verbal irony, and verbal irony is when a character says one thing, but they mean another. And the key there is kind of that they're saying it. That's what makes it verbal. So it's also sometimes called being sarcastic or showing sarcasm. So an example would be if somebody walked into a locker room and was like, wow, it smells really good in here. Because we know that a locker room's probably not going to smell good. Or if someone said, awesome, another homework packet. They're not really happy that they have homework. So they're being ironic, okay? They're displaying verbal irony, or they're being sarcastic. The next example is dramatic irony, and it's when the reader understands more about the events of a story than the character. And raise your hand if you remember reading The Ravine this year. The Ravine? Right, so that's a good example of dramatic irony, because for the majority of that story, we know what's going on with Vinny when Vinny doesn't even understand what's going on. So when we know more than the character knows, that's an example of dramatic irony. So some examples here at the bottom say, Tim's parents are proud of the A he got on the test, but we know that he cheated. So they really shouldn't be proud of him, but they don't know that. Another example is, Alex writes a love poem to Judy, but we know that Judy loves Devin. Okay, so Alex is super excited about this love that he has for Judy, but then we know that Judy doesn't like him. So that makes it dramatic irony, because we know more than Alex knows. And then the last example is situational irony. So in situational irony, what actually happens is the opposite of what is expected. So that kind of goes back to that cake example that I just gave about the professional cake carrier dropping the cake. That would be situational irony, because the situation that that person was in isn't what we would have expected them to be in. Some other examples that they give are General Sedgwick's last words were, they couldn't hit an elephant at this distance. And if you know anything about that story, he actually does end up getting hit, so with like a gun. And then the last thing, Bill Gates uses an Apple computer. If you know anything about Bill Gates, he's famous for the Windows computers. And if he uses an Apple computer, it's kind of like he's using the competitor's computer. It's kind of like if you worked at Burger King, but you went to McDonald's all the time. Okay, that'd be situational irony. Okay, so just a quick review real quick before I pass out some notes, and then we're going to look at our Frayer diagram. Something that is ironic is unexpected. So if it's unexpected by a character, then it's dramatic irony. If it's unexpected by everyone, it's situational irony. And if it's sarcasm, or somebody is being sarcastic, then it's verbal irony. Okay, and I'm going to keep this up here for the next part. But what I'm going to do is, in your groups, I'm going to pass out each of you some notes about irony, and you're going to go through and you're going to fill out a Frayer diagram. Now, what a Frayer diagram is, if we remember from earlier in the year working with them, we have a little circle here in the middle, and whatever example of irony or type of irony that you're given, you're going to write that right in the circle right here. Okay? And then using the notes that I provide for you and the PowerPoint that we just went through, you're going to write down a definition for that type of irony. You're going to write down some characteristics of that type of irony. You're going to write some examples of that type of irony, and then some non-examples. Okay? So when we think about examples and non-examples, you can think about the examples that we gave up on the PowerPoint slide. So let's say you're given verbal irony. Then your examples are going to be types of sarcasm, but your non-examples might be types of like situational irony or dramatic irony. Okay? And if you have any questions about that, I'll be walking around as well. Okay? You want to pass these out for me real quick, Katie? You guys will be the situational irony group. Any of those extras you can just keep there. You guys will be the dramatic irony group. Any extras you can just hold on to. Okay. And then you guys will be the verbal irony group. And again, any of those extras you can just hold on to. Okay? Ideally, I'd like you to take about 4 or 5 minutes to try to fill this out. You may work with your group members, okay? So maybe each of you wants to take one box, and then you can kind of share your information. Just make sure that you have all 4 boxes filled out, okay? So the verbal irony group is simply going to write verbal irony in the middle of their Frayer diagram. Situational irony group is going to write situational in their middle circle. Remember, it's okay to discuss with your group. Use your group. That's why they're there with you. Talk about what a good definition might be. Talk about where in the notes to find that good definition. The part you're probably really going to have to work on is those non-examples, because on your notes you're only provided examples. Your guys' characteristics? What do you guys? What's a good characteristic of situational irony? What's something that makes it different from the other types of irony?
It's an action.
Okay, it's an action. That's good. You might want to write that. And then if you also look up there where it says situational, it's unexpected by everyone. Everyone is surprised by what happens. Because if we remember with dramatic irony, the reader's not surprised. The reader already knows. Okay? So I would definitely make sure that you put action and then put everyone.
What if like someone's getting married?
And that person who's there says no.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then they came up and everybody said no, and all of a sudden they just said no, but they're not gonna get married. They walked out.
Okay, so people
So
getting married.
people would expect her to say yes, but she
People
didn't.
would expect the bride to say yes. Just so that know.
Take about a minute to finish up,
You know.
and even if you don't get finished, make sure that you have enough and you
Yeah.
can at least discuss it with another group.
I think she get married to say no.
Because you have to say I do. But
Like I said, I do.
but if you say I don't, then you didn't know.
Okay. You could do this one. Bill Gates used Apple computer instead of his. The computer he used just made it. Bill Gates used an Apple computer instead of a Windows. Would be great. Or do you want to make a different one?
I'm using mine.
Let's do instead of that one. We could do. We could say. We could say. When you have a kid, you gotta pick out a name, but you pick a name when you're pregnant with it, and then you change it when you're 3 years. You could say something like that. Like you pick a kid's name, but then you change it when it's born. Because that's like
Kind of makes sense, but like.
All right, take about 15 seconds, finish up your last
let's just
notes
use
that you're
this.
writing down,
Let's just shoot them.
and then at that point, you can drop your pencil and you can freeze. So finish up the sentence you're writing on.
Like he's using an Apple computer instead of the Windows computer that he made.
5 seconds. Alright, so done or not, just drop your pencil. It's okay if you're not finished. We can take time to finish this later. I want to just take 1 second to discuss these Frayer models real quick. Because there's a lot of advantages to this that you don't always have to have a handout like this to do one. You could create one of these on your own. If there's a word that you